Today, I wanted to talk about giving good writing feedback. I am doing a survey currently, and this was one of the things that I wanted the most of. Speaking of which, if you'd like to put your own input on the survey, please look at the link below. It will close at midnight on Thursday, so please try to give your input. This is for the Adult Writers Club in specific. The Teen Writers Club one is on the Teen Writers Club video that came out yesterday. One of the things that we talked about was how to give good writing feedback and if that would be beneficial to have a lesson on it. And it seemed like the majority of responses so far were saying yes. As a result, I wanted to talk about some basics with that today. Obviously, I'm not going to talk about all the crazy in depth, like, here's how to basically be an editor thing. No, I'm just going to talk about what makes good writing feedback and what makes bad writing feedback. And when I say bad, I don't necessarily mean that you are bad if you give be doing give feedback that is more helpful to the author. And if you've received feedback like this, you might understand why it's less than helpful. And these are ways to make it more helpful. So first thing is to look deeper. For example, instead of just saying this character annoys me, figure out why it's annoying you. That's not very constructive. That's just stating an opinion. However, if it's annoying you for a specific reason, for example, she's a Mary Sue character, a Mary Sue character being someone who is overly perfect to the point that it is obnoxious to the reader because we can't relate to them, then say that instead. Say they're coming off as a Mary Sue because of X, Y, and Z reasons. Perhaps if you gave them more flaws or made their flaws more evident, they would be less Mary Sue like. Or if they had more try fail cycles, fill in the blank with whatever you think might make it less annoying for you. Instead of just looking at the surface level of how you feel, try looking into why you feel that way. Next thing is realizing what is an opinion and what is an actual problem. You might think that the character's really annoying, but they might just be annoying to you because they're snobby and they are going to have a redemption character arc and they're going to become a good person. For example, me. I can't stand Pride and Prejudice because of the fact that the whole I'm a snob and then I get this kind of redemption arc and become less of a snob idea is really annoying to me. And I couldn't stand it. However, it's a classic for a reason. Lots of people actually love that. So there might be things that you don't like about someone's writing that aren't actually a problem with their writing. It's more of a problem of you not liking that character personally. And this is why it's really important to look deeper into why before you comment. If it is bothering you because that is just a personal matter, that's different. But if it is an actual thing that you think will bother the majority of people, then it is worth mentioning, especially if there is something that is not written as well and could be honed and crafted to be written better. We're going to talk about some classic examples of things that could be wrong in writing that you may not even notice that you're doing or notice that other people are doing. It'll just kind of give you this general, like, ugh, I didn't like that feeling, and you won't be sure why. So, since we're talking about identifying why, here are some things that you might run into. First, being info dumping. This is when you, instead of being given little tidbits like, oh, here's a little tiny bit of scenery, here's a little tiny bit of what the character looks like, here's a little tiny bit of the mystery. They just go, here's a textbook on the backstory of the whole universe and this character and everything they've ever done and everything they ever will do. That is called info dumping. You might notice that there is such thing as just like tactful telling, there is such thing as tactful info dumping. However, typically, if you're feeling overwhelmed and like, whoa, that was way too much, it's not tactful. Typically, tactful info dumping is something that you don't even notice. For example, in Harry Potter, he learns about the wizarding world pretty much all in one day. That is technically a tactful info dump because Hagrid is teaching him all about the wizarding world as he's walking him through Diagon Alley. And so as a result of that, he and the leaky cauldron and everything else that's going on, he's able to learn about the wizarding world in a way that feels tactful, even though it is definitely an info dump. He's learning this all at once and it's all being dumped on him, but because it's being dumped on him, it feels more enchanting to you because you're like, oh, I'm relating to Harry Potter rather than just being like, whoa, too much all at once. Similar things with Brandon Sanderson novels. You might notice that he will do bits and pieces and learn about the world, but he'll also just dump you into the point of view of a character who knows way more about the world. This allows you to be able to quickly think on your feet and kind of almost have this, like, whoa, I've been dumped into this world, let's figure it all out kind of moment. Um, Once again, it feels more tactful. Info dumping, though, can definitely be a problem. And if you do see someone doing it, I would definitely mention, hey, I think you're info dumping here. You might want to try slowing it down, smoothing out the pacing a little more, or try making it more tactful. Um, Next thing I would mention is hanging a lantern on something. You don't have to solve all the right reader's answers right away. However, if you don't know the answer, it's okay to not know the answer as long as you acknowledge that the character doesn't know the answer either. The best way to hang a lantern on it is to show that the character is knowledgeable in other ways. It's not that they don't know anything, it's just that they don't know about this specific thing. Kind of like in Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. They hang a lantern on the fact that Hermione doesn't know about the Sorcerer's Stone because she's like, I'm super smart. I've read all these books. I know all these things. And yet I don't remember what this is about. It sounds familiar, but I don't know what it's about. This helps the reader feel like, oh, okay, so we will learn the answer eventually, but we don't know now, and that's okay. Or even if you're not going to learn the answer eventually, maybe acknowledging no one knows the answer and we don't know that we ever will learn the answer will actually help the reader to feel more acknowledged in that moment instead of just being like, well, you don't get the answer. Next thing is Mary Sue's and Marty Stew's. These are when your characters feel incredibly powerful to a point that is unrealistic. And this can be on a very basic level too. If you have a character who's a genius or just incredibly intelligent, like Hermione, it's important to show their flaws too. The reason Hermione works is because she's incredibly intelligent, but she also has a lot of flaws. Those being that she has a hard time expressing her emotions properly, she gets very easily angry at Ron and whatnot. Like that one moment where she's like, "Will you stop eating?" and is beating him with a book because he won't care about where Harry is, and she's super anxious. Um, but because of that, it makes us so we like her more. If she was just incredibly intelligent and perfect all the time and reacted exactly perfectly to every situation, she'd be really obnoxious. Um, there are a lot of times where Mary Sue's can be written well, though. Mary Sue's and Marty Stew's, good examples of them are Superman and Captain Marvel. The reason that Captain Marvel and Superman are Mary Sue and Marty Stew is because of the fact that they both go from zero to hero in perfect harmony. And Superman actually doesn't technically have any flaws. Even as a person, he's a perfectly good, honorable person. He doesn't have any flaws or issues. His only real flaw is the fact that he cannot choose between the love of his life and the love of humanity. And even though that is a flaw per se, because all of humanity could die while he's saving his girlfriend, it's not really a flaw because we understand that. The issue here is the fact that his really one and only flaw is kryptonite, which is a rock from a very rare space planet. That makes it so that he is pretty much unstoppable all the time. The reason why newer superhero movies have captured a lot more of like flawed superheroes, and even new Superman movies have captured a lot more of like he's a dynamic, emotional person who has a lot of complex things going on in his life, is because of the fact that it makes them more interesting. Captain Marvel has the same problem, where her only problem is that I'm too angry. Which, even though that can be, or passionate, I think is technically how they phrase it, but, and even though that can be a problem if you're trying to be all strategic and aloof like they were teaching her to be, it's not really a problem. Now, if she had true anger issues where she just got mad out of nowhere, that would be a real flaw, but it wasn't a real flaw because she also got over it so fast. She was basically like, guess what? I'm super passionate and that's just a part of who I am. Screw you. And it was very like, this isn't even a flaw. My one flaw isn't a flaw, and therefore I'm perfect. And it kind of annoyed some viewers because they were like, but you're no longer human in this case. Even though the whole point was that because of her passion and everything, she was supposed to be more human, but she never had any flaws. She never did anything wrong. And that's not relatable to us. It also didn't help that she didn't have any try fail cycles, really. She had one or two, but typically we like to see people fail a lot before they succeed. The reason why we like to see people fail is not because we like seeing people fail, but because we can relate to that. We as people fail a lot. I've failed a lot. You failed a lot. Even if you succeeded at something, I bet you failed at it at least a dozen times before you succeeded at that thing. Trying things and being successful is hard. And therefore, we want to see that reflected in the characters. So if you aren't really seeing that, a great feedback that you could give is, hey, this character is feeling not not relatable enough for me, and here are some things that could make them more relatable for me. And maybe mention, or even if they're too snobby or something, say, hey, mention moments when they're not snobby, mention moments when they're really kind, mention why they're a snob. Having reasons for their actions can also really help. Or if they are a Mary Sue or Marjorie Stew, like Superman and Captain Marvel, give them a reason for it, like they did, which is in some ways why it went so well. Because both Captain Marvel and Superman have reasons for why they are so perfect. And so as a result of that, they can kind of get away with it. Next thing is line editing. Now comes into a lot more of a editor territory, but you can still definitely help with this. If you're noticing that a sentence is confusing, don't just gloss it over. Say, hey, I don't understand what's being said in this sentence. And then if the writer gives you context and you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense, then move on. But if the writer gives you context and you're like, that's not what I got at all, then that would be the time to talk with the writer and go, hey, let's clear up this sentence and make sure that it is more clear in the future. Line editing can be incredibly helpful for multiple reasons. It can remove redundant sentences where you're like, the sky was as blue as sapphires, and the sea, and the where it keeps giving descriptors of blue. It's like you only need one. Um, or alternatively, you might have two sentences describing something very similarly. It was like the most beautiful of ball gowns, and yet it was also like the most billowing of capes, and yet, and it keeps going on like that. It's like, okay, picking one descriptor will actually make it more solid and more potent than having 6 or 7 different descriptors, um, especially when it comes to redundancy. Next thing is plot holes. Plot holes are things that don't quite make sense. For example, if the character is making some sort of bakery good and they don't measure anything and yet it turns out perfectly, at least hang a lantern on it and acknowledge, oh, I'm a really, really good baker. And so I just know these measurements by heart now, or something like that. Then we're hanging a lantern on this plot hole. Or we resolve the plot hole and we go back and add measuring cups to the scene. Or alternatively, you might have a moment where the character is trying to do a certain magic spell, and earlier you already established, hey, this magic spell doesn't work for X, Y, and Z reasons, and they haven't fixed X, Y, and Z reasons, and yet it suddenly works. That's going to be a problem. The reader's going to want to know why. The reader's going to want to know how it worked without that, or you're just going to have to get rid of those stipulations altogether. You can work with plot holes and things like that by retconning. Retconning is when you go back and you kind of say like, oh, well, the reason it worked before is this. If you're in a series, because you kind of can't I mean, unless you're an indie author, you kind of can't unpublish the previous book and then publish the new book again, especially if you're going traditional. That's why uh, there's a lot of YouTube videos about out there about Harry Potter and all sorts of things doing this, where they'll be like, they established this lore already and then they retconned it because of the fact that she wanted to make it more complex, but then in the process kind of screwed things up. By the way, I know that J.K. Rowling's a horrible person, but Harry Potter is something that generally all people know. And so as a result, um, I am going to use it as an example so that way everyone can kind of know what's going on. So even if you don't like J.K. Rowling, I don't like what she's doing either. Please just bear with me in the Harry Potter examples because most people know those examples. Last thing is flat characters. If you're noticing a writer having flat characters, this is incredibly important to mention. Now, signs of flat characters include emotions falling flat, where your character might say, oh, I love them with all of my heart, and yet you as a reader are like, do you? And that's probably a sign that they're a flat character, that they haven't been developed enough, that their relationship hasn't been shown enough. And so as a result, as a reader, we're going, don't really feel that. Another sign of flat characters is knowing almost nothing about them. They go, "Yeah, Jerry, remember Jerry?" And we're all like, "Who's Jerry?" That means that they're probably a really flat character. Last sign of a flat character that can really help you identify it is that the character doesn't feel realistic. It feels like a cardboard cutout could have been put in that room and done just as good a job as Jerry. Jerry's cardboard cutout and Jerry are the same thing. They either say a lot of the same lines or just repeat a lot of the other characters' lines, or alternatively, they don't really seem to have any personality of their own. They're very basic and not very developed. And when I say basic, I don't mean like basic in the text sense where people say, like, that's a very basic white girl or whatever. I mean basic in the sense that there's no real depth to their emotions. It's just, I am sad, I am happy, I am feeling whatever the other characters are feeling with no real opinions of my own. That is a sign that the character might be too flat. Now, with all of these scenarios, keep in mind there's a difference between constructive criticism and just criticism. Just criticism, as I've talked about in previous videos, is when you say, this is bad, or I don't like this, or this whole paragraph needs to be deleted. That's not actually helpful. Now, if you say, I would delete this paragraph because it's ultimately really redundant, or I would rewrite this paragraph because it's really info dumping and I feel really confused and overwhelmed here. Or your characters feel really flat. I would love to see more development of these characters. Those are all constructive. They're telling you, hey, this is what I'm noticing. Here's a way that I think you could fix this. And sure, I know that might seem like, oh, I'm so amazing. No, you're just trying to help them. It's no different than looking at someone making a birdhouse and noticing that they're using the wrong tools to make said birdhouse and then saying, "Oh yeah, it'd be better to use this tool." It's not that you're a master carpenter. It's just that you know a little more than they do or are able to see it from a different perspective than they do and as a result are able to help them. So don't worry about seeming officious. Just try to state it in the most polite way possible. If you're noticing that the story's a little too slow, maybe mention, "Hey, I think that these scenes should probably be cut out because it's running a little slow." Or if you feel it's too fast-paced, mentioning, "I would love to see this scene developed more because this scene is so good and I feel like you skipped over some good stuff here." That way you're both complimenting what they did well, but also telling them, hey, here's some things that we gotta work on. If you guys feel that this was a good video, please give it a thumbs up, and I would love to see what you guys think. So please, if you're an adult, answer the Adult Writers Club survey, and if you're a teen, please go back to the teen video that I posted on Monday and use the link there. Thank you so much, and I hope this video was helpful.